Yes, thank you. I'm going to be talking about the National Waste Report 2022. And thanks for the intro, Gail. Yeah, okay. So here's an overview of the presentation. It was released on the 16th of December 2022. I'm the lead author of this collaborative effort. And when I say collaborative, all these folks are involved, contributed to it. So again, it's a bigger project every time we've done it. I'm going to present some of the main findings. I've got 26 slides to follow. I'm going to aim to talk for about 40 minutes, then take questions. And there's 98 pages plus appendices, so I can't get through everything, but I'll go through some of the main things. So this is a bit of a flow diagram of just showing what we present, or the key things that the data set, let's call it the headline data set that we use in the National Waste Report. Of course, it comes in the end from industry, but we collect the data mainly from the states and territories. Each one is a little bit different in what they report and how they report it. So there's a bit of sort of smushing it into a coherent story needs to go on, various manipulations, conversions, gap filling, etc., etc. And there's two different tools we use for that, one for hazardous waste and one for non-hazardous waste. And those things, when they converge, they go into the National Waste Database. We now have national standards to describe this process, and the states and territories are using those national standards to slowly transform their own systems, or when they're doing things to their system, to help converge the data sets over time. The data from the states and territories is also supplemented by some data from industry surveys and other national data. So that's basically what we do to get this story together. And here's a little picture of the scope, which would be familiar to most people: municipal waste, C&I, C&D, and its various components. Then the waste categories and types. The usual building and demolition materials, glass, metals, organics, etc., etc. But we do extend it a little bit, whereas we focus on the headline data set. We do have various types of waste we call non-core waste, such as manures, bagasses, red mud from bauxite refining and similar. And we also then report on waste management. We divide that into two types. There's the pathways, interim stages, and then there's the FATES. And the FATES is resource recovery, consisting of recycling, energy from waste, and waste reuse, disposal then, and long-term storage. And the pathways is various things. Like, for example, a materials recovery facility is considered a pathway. Waste reuse you may not have heard of before. This is new and was fixed in the standard that was released last year. It's the first time we've trialled the use of the standard in this category. The idea is it's supposed the feds are keen on expanding the scope of this and making sure we don't miss out some key areas. For example, what is sold from reuse shops or tip shops at landfills. We wanted to include that. So the waste reuse means stuff that used to be in the waste stream and then becomes not in the waste stream, but without any processing, such as you do with recycling. So it covers those sorts of things. We'll see that more. Okay. All right. Now, as a data geek, we have to discuss quality before we go further, and there are some weaknesses in this system. Data is, I should say, it's accessible through a national waste database. It's available online, and it's reasonably consistent methods going back to 2006-7 to give us this longitudinal data set. Weaknesses then, data is not always available to encompass the full scope. We have to make estimates to fill gaps sometimes. Data is sometimes categorized in different ways by states and territories, and we have to merge and marry them together. The composition of waste to landfill is a weakness. We're reporting recovery rates by material, but to count that, we're having to examine how much waste goes to landfill. That means taking quantities and then putting an assumed composition on them. That's a bit of a weakness. It's recognized as a weakness, and I believe there's some proposed national leadership in terms of getting that together so that it's not each state and territory on their own, as it has been to date in working that out. Jurisdictional data systems focus on the materials they manage, not the materials they generate. Now, we want to know generation. So if waste goes from one jurisdiction to another, we need to allocate it back to where it was generated. That's not always easy due to the way the data is stored. In some jurisdictions, data on recovered waste is from voluntary surveys. Still, now mostly that's changed, but there's still some of that, and the quality of that data tends to be lower. Some people just don't want to play, or the number of parameters you get what's delivered, but you don't necessarily get what's processed. So weakness there. A small amount of data from volumetric surveys that have to be converted to density functions. Waste streams are not fully separate. In amongst the municipal solid waste, there's some C&I because of high-rise buildings, for example, and the other way around. Municipal waste is collected and covers some businesses. So there's it's not always, you can't always tease them apart perfectly. And commercial confidentiality prevents some reporting when it's really narrow. We had an instance of this this year. I won't mention names. And lastly, importantly, administrative restructuring in a state or territory can make a problem. And we've had that in the past. And this year, Victorian data, recycling data, recovery data is estimated with their assistance and based on some reasonable evidence, that is growth rates in local government waste, but it is in the end an estimate because of the change from Sustainability Victoria to Recycling Victoria. It just fell in a heap a little bit, I think. Okay, so here's the table of contents of the report, 16 chapters, and these ones that are highlighted are the ones that encompass what I referred to before as the, what did I call it? Well, the main data set, from which we report, for example, progress against the national waste target. There's other additional information such as local government waste management data, which we report, but is not included in the data set for assessment. That's got from mainly from landfills and recovery facilities reporting quantities and tons. So, and that's going to be the main focus of what I'm talking about, is those highlighted bits. Before I do that, here's just a quick diagram. Now, you won't be able to see all of this straight off, but it is, I think these slides are going to be shared, so you'll be able to have a look at it then, and it's in the report. It's basically a Sankey diagram overviewing the headline data set. So it's showing red is going to disposal, yellow is going on to recovery, blue is processed material. And so you can see the relative scales. For example, this big thing here is construction and demolition waste going to recycling. All of the red, most of this here is going to landfill. And for example, this here at the top right-hand corner is exports of material in 2021 of recovered material going overseas. So it gives you a bit of a gives you a bit of a snapshot, and I'd like to point out that that's there. It gives a good quick overview. Now, perhaps the first and substantial thing we're going to be talking about as a finding then is progress against the national targets, which the national targets baseline 2016-17, and the targets are down the left-hand side there. This is in the National Waste Policy Action Plan. And we, in the National Waste Report, we use the data to assess on progress. So ban exports of various materials, I think regulate is the word they're using now, and that's certainly happening. Reduce total waste generated in Australia by 10% per person by 2030. We estimate a 3% increase since 2016-17 and no change since the last National Waste Report 2 years ago. 80% average recovery from all waste streams following the waste hierarchy. We estimate an increase of 2.2 percentage points and negligible change from National Waste Report 2020. So not really happening well enough as yet. Of course, this is 2020-21, and there's investment going in and a lot of change. So hopefully the next one, we're going to be seeing some improvements there. Significantly increase the use of recycled content. We estimate increase of 15% since 2016-17. Phase out unnecessary plastics, problematic, single use, apparently happening. Halve the amount of organic waste to landfill. Well, we estimate a 3% increase since 2016-17, but as I said, the data on this is not good, and that needs to be improved because doing snapshot audits, they're not done every year, so we don't really get a very good overview of this. And making data available, that's apparently happening. Okay, so a mixed bag there. A bit disappointing, probably for some to see not so much progress as we would hope for. Okay, here's an overview of waste generation in Australia 2020-21. Now you can see this is what we call a headline data scope, this whole bar there. And on that, we've got 75.8 million tonnes. And then there's this part here, which we call core waste. This is the waste that's managed, or nearly all managed by the waste and resource recovery industry. This is ash, or coal combustion products, as they like to call them, coming from coal-fired power generation. Here's the split of material types. And you can see big ones, or not types, categories, is this broader classification. Building and demolition waste, organics, are big ones here, and hazardous waste, which is mostly soils and asbestos contaminated soils. 63.8 million tonnes of core waste. Now I'm going to show you this one as well. Now this is a different bar. This is showing here, actually this lot here, called core waste plus ash, is at the top of this bar there. The rest of it is showing what we call non-core waste that we've recorded, which are principally here, this big orangey thing, mining waste. There's also organic primary production waste, organic processing waste, and mineral processing waste, which is mainly red mud. So, putting this in context, yes, this is what the industry has to deal with, but there's much more out there in the wild, going into dams and mining sites, and been processed in as part of organic processing. They're not included in the targets. This is the headline data set for targets. Okay. Now I'm going to move faster, I think. Waste generation trends 2006-7 to 2021 we're showing now. Okay, so here's the pattern going back in time there. You can see we had this big increase, and then it started leveling off, but still going up. And you can see here that increase is mainly from construction and demolition waste. When you have big projects in a city, then of course you're going to have a big increase in quantities of materials. I might mention here, Victoria has adjusted its waste reduction target to exclude C&D waste for that purpose. The feds have not done that. The municipal waste, right? Oh, I might say here too. This is absolute quantities, and this is going to, you can see this in the other charts. This is absolute quantities like tons, and this is waste per capita on the right with just this line chart. So now you can see on the waste per capita basis, it's a slightly different story. You're still seeing an increase, as I talked about in C&D waste. But C&I waste and MSW are on overall a downward trend, but with an increase at the end here. What's that now? Now we think that this looks like COVID, as in the transfer of materials from C&I to MSW due to lockdowns primarily. So combined, they pretty much flatline. Another thing we might mention here too is that when there's an expansion of organic waste collection systems at households, and when you give people new bins, they tend to fill up with material that previously wasn't going in the bin. So there's that's going to cause a little bit of an increase in total waste generation. Here's recycling and waste reuse in 2020-21. We're looking at 45.4 million tonnes. You can see C&D is proportionally a bit bigger than it was in generation, but because the recovery rates are really good. I'm going to go on to the trends straight away. Now, this is a bit more of a healthy trend that we'd like to see, an overall substantial rising in the total quantity of recovered materials over time, including in construction and demolition waste, well, probably more than any other. On the right, you can see that's also translated to an overall trend per capita, similar. But here, when we go to the material streams, we've got an interesting story. Yeah, look at the C&D stuff there. Recycling increasing faster than generation. So we're doing reasonably well in the recovery of that according to this data set. C&I waste, though, going down in absolute terms and going down in per capita terms. Municipal waste has got a fun little blip in it there. Well, it's a bigger blip. And I think a chunk of that is related to New South Wales changing its system in 2014-15 and finding a lot less organics than they previously had. And we haven't been able to correct the historical data set, so we're left with that little bump there. But municipal waste recovery, once that bump's taken out, we do have a trend towards, on at least on a per capita basis, an increase in recycling. CNI is a bit of an interesting story there, and it's partly due to COVID, I think, but it's not only that. And the recorded recovery rate is down, and it's the lowest on record. Although in the margin of error, it's probably not much different from other years. But this data set points to needing to do things about CNI, it seems to me. Here's an energy recovery trend. I'm just going to show you this. I'm not going to talk about the differences between states and territories. This is primarily to do with landfill gas. And the data suggests that landfill gas collection quantities are not as high as they used to be. Now, when I talk to people like LMS about that, they're amazed and they say, "Oh, I don't think that's right. How can it be? We are scouring for landfill gas quite more assiduously than we ever have." It's possibly to do with reducing organics to landfill. That is, there is less gas to capture. There's also the possibility that flaring, which has got a slightly increased share, is taking some of this. That is the case. There's a bit more flaring, but it still looks like an overall decrease from this peak period since then, even including flaring. But overall, now this is a chart showing greenhouse gas emissions from waste as reported in the national inventory, and you can see an overall declining trend, and we can attribute most, probably nearly all of that decrease to landfill gas collection. So it's an essential part of the operation of the waste management system. Here's disposal trends over the same period. And again, the sort of thing we'd like to see, an overall decline, but looking not so great at the end there. It looks like this data set, to me, it tells us it's getting a bit harder to pull stuff out. C&I waste, yeah, slight increase there, and also a slight increase in municipal waste disposal. What's that about? Now, we might dig into that just a little bit more. But I should point out that disposal doesn't cover all landfill, because some of the landfill quantities in the Commonwealth system, some of the stuff that goes to landfill is attributed to energy recovery, as we've seen, to do with landfill gas collection. So we do the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting calculation backwards to estimate that quantity, and we attribute this amount to landfill as under the category energy recovery rather than disposal. There's also some disposal that's not landfill, for example, incineration. But anyway, I'm looking here now at landfill management in particular. That is in aggregate, and this is in response to Mike Rishi saying to me, what's going on with these trends? So just having a little dig into this now. You can see wasted landfill in Australia overall. There has been an increase in the last couple of years, despite levies and all the rest of it. When we try and analyse that by material, well, look, as I said, it's due to snapshots. So we do have estimates, but they're not necessarily great. It's showing organics going up. It's showing lots of materials going up. Building and demolition materials have gone up a little bit. Hazardous waste slightly down. But take this with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because the data is not great. But this data on total quantities is solid data. It's mostly from levies, so it's going to be reasonably accurate. Okay, I'm going to break that down a slightly different way. CNI, MSW, C&D across the country, and also by jurisdiction. Okay, well, CNI and MSW, you can see, yes, those quantities to landfill increased over the last couple of years in both of those sectors, as reported to us. When we look at it by state and territory, yeah, look at those. Queensland, there's a big bit of a jump there. WA, South Australia. South Australia, partly, there's a bunch of reasons for this. South Australia, it's in part to do with seeing soils that are not getting used as construction for the first time. So it's possible that there was some in there, but they never had the opportunity to see it before. But part of the standard needs to be counted as disposal, and is. So that's made that's one contribution from them. Other ones, I can't give you an exact reason why, but that's the story as the data tells you. There's one more I'm going to show you here, which is landfill management, CNI, MSW, C&D. By two of those jurisdictions, the ones here, I look at Queensland, WA, which we said, okay, they're quite big and they've got an increase. So let's look at those by source stream. Okay, mixed bag again, and not a straightforward story. Now, we've got those labeled with the same colours. So Queensland, a CNI increase, and an MSW increase, and a C&D increase. WA, a little bit of increases in CNI and MSW. So looking at this data, then we don't really get an answer to Mike's question. Why is this going up despite the levy increases that are happening? We can look at this data and it's telling a story. It's a reasonable story, as in I can be quite solid about these data. I think they're correct. This, maybe not so much. But again, we probably have to say it's a bit disappointing to see this. And let's hope that it changes. Remember, this is, well, we're 2023 now, and this is 2021. So we have had changes since then. We've had investments. There's a fair bit going on. So let's hope that this changes next time we're doing this exercise. Okay, here's the recovery and recycling rates by jurisdiction. And as per usual, despite that increase that I talked about in what the scope of what's included in South Australia in their levy, it's coming out looking the best with a resource recovery rate of 80%. Resource recovery rate including recycling, waste reuse, and energy recovery, which includes landfill gas. So here's the waste reuse. Now, these are not just tip shops, obviously. Once we started going that, we had to say, okay, well, what other things are not processed? It includes some ash that is used to rehabilitate voids, where it's classified as recycling, which is a couple of jurisdictions, and also some hazardous, some soil that's been used in similar ways. Now, we don't include all stuff that's been put into a hole, but there are some when it is classified by the jurisdiction as recycling because it's a specific rehabilitation, approved rehabilitation project. So we have an overall recovery rate in Australia of 63%. We have this order has not changed in the 4 times now we've done this report. It's been pretty similar. South Australia, ACT, New South Wales and Victoria, WA, Tasmania, Queensland, Northern Territory. Well, Tasmania is improving. Tasmania has done a lot of work in recent years to improve the recovery rate and include that waste system. Okay, so this 63%, and that's what we're reporting when we're looking at the progress against the targets. Okay, now I'm going to look at resource recovery recycling rates by stream. C&D is looking the best. CNI core plus ash is CNI core, so you can see it's mostly ash going in there. And municipal waste, you can see as well then that the landfill gas collection or the landfill gas generation really is primarily coming from municipal waste, from food waste, paper and cardboard and garden waste and so on that's going into landfill. Now look at materials. So there you can see that waste reuse in the ash thing that previously was counted as recycling is now counted as waste reuse. Building demolition materials, big increases in quantity, but also in recovery. Glass, the big jump there, I think that's stockpiles. We get a bit of it's a difficult thing with stockpiles. When stuff bleeds out of stockpiles, it tends to come in the data even though it wasn't generated in the right year. So there's a bit of that there from Victoria. I think the same here with metals. That's not so much stockpile, there's more prices going up and stuff being pulled out of paddocks when the price goes up, you know, all the metal starts drifting, well, towards the ships really to be exported primarily. Organics, slow improvement in recovery, but not by much. Paper and cardboard a bit similar. And plastics, well, it's an ongoing sad story, isn't it, that we are not doing very well with plastics. Okay, next one we're going to talk about then is generation of organic and food waste. Now here we're stepping outside the headline data set and we're adding other things on, and that's because food waste is of course a key issue that politically, and also we have a national food waste strategy, and it doesn't just cover what's hits the waste sector, it's all the upstream stuff as well. So we've got generation then of recorded pushing 50 million tonnes, and most of that is outside of what we call the headline data set. It's organics processing and it's primary production. We've got more on that. This given a hand here is RMCG, and RMCG is producing a portfolio called Agricultural Futures Australia. Oh, sorry, I forgot that. Anyway, that will give more detail on this. And of course, we've got the National Food Waste Strategy and its baseline data set that we draw on as well. I won't go into more detail on that just due to lack of time, but I will point out that most of this is food. There is organic processing of other types, but you can see here that most of this is food waste processing. This is not too far off that once we take out the core data. Yeah. All right, international comparisons. Difficult to do because I've been talking about how the differences between states and territories and how you get them together in an even way. It's worse internationally to find out that not all jurisdictions are producing reports on a regular basis, and those that are sometimes not very transparent. We're looking for the ones that are transparent so that we can find a common platform and compare Australia in a similar way. So we have to take out a couple of things like hazardous waste, ash, and energy recovery from landfill gas are taken out of this in order to compare with the other countries. And you see one of the biggest differences here, apart from big differences in generation per capita, is energy recovery, where Norway and Singapore and so on have got a lot of incineration. We've got next to none. But the recovery rate overall, or at least the recycling rate in Australia, doesn't compare too badly with those countries. Right, cover a little bit on exports of waste and recovered materials, which of course was a huge issue a few years ago. And well, what has happened with the China crisis, followed by the export regulations? We're telling the stories here. So you can see metals still growing unaffected by those things. Paper and cardboard to be regulated in the not too distant, in a year and a half from now. And that's the trend now, certainly has gone down. This is mainly China closing the door and other countries too. But also Australia getting used to the idea that we're going to have to do something about this. We'll focus on those two. Plastics, big, and then a bit of a fall there. Textiles, going strong. This is mainly waste clothes, not part of the headline data set because that's a reuse and it's not a waste as such, but we've included in this data set here. Tyres regulated, but still going overseas in fair amounts. Glass pretty much finished, although a little bit going out. It's colour ready. There was never so much glass being exported anyway. It's interesting to compare these export quantities with the amount of stuff that's pulled out for recovery. And you can have a look at what's the export proportion compared to the total. Metals, almost half. Paper and plastic and tyres, about a third each. The rest, next to nothing. So these are the big ones really in terms of our dependency on overseas. And the paper and cardboard is probably the one where we really got to think about this, well, because we're facing change in a year and a half. And here's a little chart added as well, just showing what happened with plastics. And I've broken export quantities. This is the same data set we're looking at here, spread out a bit. And here we're breaking it down to the mixed plastics and the single polymer exports. And you can see that mixed plastics, due to the regulations, well, here's the China changes, and then due to the regulations has stopped, but has been substituted by single polymer exports. So what we're looking at here then is processing to get single polymers out of a mixed bag that was previously going overseas. So it's telling a story really of at least some degree of success in better sorting in order to export, but also reduced exports overall. Right. Okay, now we're moving outside of the presentation of the headline data set. I'm just going to be talking a little bit about some of these other chapters. So curbside services, first of all. This is shown by state and territory, the bins that people have available, and this is estimated percentage of the population. Interesting, isn't it, to see that nearly everybody's got a garbage bin. Oh, yeah, okay, perhaps that's obvious. But also, nearly everybody's got a recycling bin. A lot more. Now, actually, you know what? I think that 84% is wrong and needs to change. I think we've got an older chart in here. So it's probably a bit smaller than that. Sorry about that. Yeah, because it's showing WA wrong. My mistake. WA has got a right to verge site collection twice a year, and our initial data set that this is included, mistakenly included that as access, whereas it shouldn't have done. But anyway, so it's a little bit less. I'll show you the FOGO and GO availability later. Okay, now this is quantities collected. Now, I must say, I checked this 2 or 3 times because I was quite surprised. Look how big the garbage is compared with organics and recycling. Still, really, the bulk of the material is garbage coming out of houses. Now, I live in a council that's got 4 bins, and that is not the case in our house, or probably most people here take a lot of care. But, you know, we've got organics and food waste collection, so it all goes in there. But obviously, around the country overall, that's not the case. We still have the bulk of it going into the garbage stream. Hopefully, again, next time we're going to see some substantial change there. This is an average composition of the recycling stream. It's still got about half of it is paper and cardboard, a quarter of it is glass, and the rest is bits and pieces. Okay, here's the, now this is the corrected one. Corrected this yesterday, I forgot to do the other one. And here we've got, yeah, oh yeah, it's showing overall 79% of the population, not the number previously shown, have got access to some sort of curbside organic service. And FOGO is this one. So South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, leading on FOGO, that's food organics and garden organics collected together. And the others are mostly looking at just garden waste alone. Now that is changing across the country. It's there's strong policies in place, and this is changing over time. Okay, a bit on product stewardship. First of all, on container deposit schemes. And this chart I'm showing you because one thing we collated this out of our data, and I think there is some slightly different data published in other places, but this is what we got from the websites and communicating with the states and territories. You can see recovery rates start with South Australia, then Northern Territory, ACT, New South Wales, what was the same, then WA. And they are precisely in the order of how long they've been established. South Australia since the 1970s, and Northern Territory 10 years ago or so, and so on. So it does look like that, and this is the overall return rate, it looks like it's quite strongly influenced by how long the system has been in place. The longer it's been in place, the more we get used to it, and the more we push through that system. Here's a little chart showing the impact of container deposit systems on curbside recycling. So, you know, you're telling people, okay, you can put your glass bottles now, you can take them to the shop or wherever and get a refund rather than put it in your recycling bin. So some of it's going to come out of the recycling bin that previously was in there. So what happens overall? Are we just stealing from one thing and getting to another? Well, it doesn't look like it from this. So here is a trend showing total collections is the pink, and the curbside collections is the blue. So you can see here, for example, this is New South Wales data, by the way. So you can see that there's a decrease in curbside collections in each case, but there's an overall increase in recovery, and in the case of glass and metals, cans really mostly, a significant increase. So yeah, interesting story there showing the relativities and how, yes, you're stealing a bit from the bin, but you're getting more altogether. Other product stewardship programs that we got, well, we've done a bit of a classification here. It is a real mixed bag of what happens with product stewardship. Of course, we've got Commonwealth legislation, and there's various compulsory types, and they're not all under the new Waste Reduction Recycling Act. There's oil is under a different act. Packaging, of course, is under a National Environment protection measure. TVs and computers are the only compulsory one under the new Act. But there's a few voluntary under the new Act, and these are they. Then there's various non-accredited programs, basically voluntary, and some quite well established. There we are, the sad story of soft plastics and Red Cycle's demise. But we've also, in effect, got a bit of a queue or a priority list of the minister, basically saying, get your act together, otherwise we're going to jump in and force you into it. And these are the list here. Might be exaggerating that, I'll probably get slapped for saying that one. But, basically the minister is saying these are the ones that are of concern to me, and the industry bodies are now looking into doing that. And then there's various others that have received funding in recent years. I should say silage wrap, not slage wrap. I've got funding to look at prospects of establishing a product stewardship list. So we've got a bit of a priority system there, pushing those things along, and hopefully, I think the intention is that the list of voluntary and things under the Commonwealth legislation will improve over time. And the last thing I want to show you actually is household hazardous waste collections as well, which is sort of not quite product stewardship. Basically, the state's picking up most of this tab, really, but it is a program to collect product-related waste. And yeah, it is interesting that, to me anyway, that it's not on this list here, but these are really expensive programs in some jurisdictions where they're paying thousands of dollars a ton to collect these products. Now, the scope of what's included in these varies, and some of them are run by local governments, like here. Some of them are run by states, like here. Yeah, and we've tried to exclude paint from this, so it's all types of household hazardous waste collected. It's an important program, and one we perhaps don't do much song and a dance as we should. So there's more of a song and a dance for you. So, okay, I think now that's it from me. That's all I've got covered here, and I'm happy now to take questions.
Awesome, Joe. That was great. Thank you for that. And you covered a lot of territory. Dane, I just sent you a clarification on your question because I want to ask it, but I don't understand it. So really interesting, Joe, at the get-go about the difference in the core and the non-core and the agricultural and mining. Like we're struggling with the 75.8 million that we've now got. And we don't really, we're not actually including a tenth of it, I think, from memory of what we totally generate in Australia. So it's a little bit scary when you look at it. Chris Thomas asked, does mining waste include core waste created on the site? If so, what percentage of the mining waste has the core waste inside of it?
Good question. Look, I don't think our data on mining waste, core waste generated by mining, is very good. We've got it from some, Queensland is good at collecting that, and it's included there, but I don't think they all are. It's a bit of a state of flux at the moment. I believe there's a bit of a focus on trying to get recovery. Like, for example, these big mining tires have been previously buried. They are now being trundled off for recovery, and in quite big quantities. But the data is not great on that. But I will say it's small. It's a minor proportion of this huge quantity.
Isabel's asked, is in total waste generation, I know that you gave us sometimes in percentage and sometimes in tonnes, but is the total waste generation, I think that was, she put that in when you were doing the commercial and industrial waste, was that related more to increase in population as opposed to, so is it a per capita reality of the growth of population that we're seeing that increase? But I would know that my first reaction to some of that C&I stuff was it was COVID, quite challenging times potentially for some of those volumes, but we really aren't seeing a lot of investment in C&I infrastructure.
That's probably right. Look, I've put the chart up now. I think you're still seeing that, so you can see.
Can't see it. Check it
on a per capita basis, generation, C&I reasonably level, slightly declining, construction demolition waste going up, municipal a long-term decline with a blip at the end, which I'm going to guess is COVID. So it is quite a strange thing. it's counterintuitive. You see, we've got more and more bins. Well, we have anyway, and you certainly seem to have plastic everywhere. And I would have guessed, if I hadn't looked at it, so I would have guessed municipal waste has been going up for a long term. But per capita overall, it's going down. I think there's something in this as well, which is to do with lighter materials. That is, we've got more volume but less mass.
Yeah, I think that the trend that we saw, Murphs, from my dim duck days in the past, was that, lightweighting was about 2 or 3% reduction per annum, as well as your consumption pattern changes. So you're definitely seeing that. And if you think that some of the heavier items like glass is going out in CDS and a recycling capacity, you will definitely see those trends. Just to get on the data, with the C&D data, like you mentioned, and it seems a bit of an anomaly, that the C&D is going up through COVID, and we know we had a lot of site change. Do you think there's potentially some issues around that? Because it was before we've seen things like mass balancing start in South Australia, because it's SA and WA who are claiming like almost 1 million tonnes increase. But, we've seen far more installation of weigh bridges, mass balance reporting, EPA Act changes. So do you think that data is potentially robust?
Look, I think it is. There definitely is an element of that in there, and there's so many stories in here which mess this data up. And but there's that, and there's that, and there. But I think overall, I think we can reasonably confident. Look at the scale of that increase there. Primarily, I think these C&D waste increases is massive projects. It's large scale projects happening now. I must say, when we first started seeing this rise here that we're seeing in C&D material generation, I figured it was going to go down again after these big projects were over. But look, it's just each year it's gone shooting up even further.
At some stage, they've got to stop building South Road in Adelaide, right? So eventually those tonnes will go down.
Yeah, true. Look,
don't Adelaide people yell at me.
Here's another bit of noise in the data. This was clean material, it wouldn't be counted. If it's contaminated material, it is. So let's say Melbourne's tunnelling spoil with PFAS contamination, all the trouble they've had with that. If that PFAS contamination wasn't there, we wouldn't be seeing this material in the data set. So there's a bit of noise in there from that kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's not get into the definition of what's clean material and how it can avoid a weigh bridge at a facility. All right, leading on from that one then, good question. So how are you actually, you mentioned at the start that you're actually trying to track material that moves between jurisdictions back to origin, I think. So how is interstate disposal attributed to states? And I've got to say, it's not just New South Wales going to Queensland, it's Queensland coming back to New South Wales at the moment. Yeah, a bit of that. But, look, as well, we should forget as well, New South Wales being the victim of all of this, having the big levy and then its waste going off. It also happens the other way around, because New South Wales rural levies don't have rural landfills don't have a levy on them. So they get chunks of material from the ACT and from Victoria, where a levy escape is running off to levy-free landfills in New South Wales. We got some data on that. It is actually quite difficult. Well, I will say straight out that the large landfill that has taken a chunk of material from the ACT wouldn't tell us how much quantity it is, and wouldn't tell New South Wales EPA. So we are guessing that quantity. In some cases there's decent data, some cases there isn't. Some cases we're getting estimates from people who know the local governments involved, etc. So the data is not good on this, and it is an area where hopefully over time it's part of the standards I referred to, that they capture the jurisdiction of origin. There's also materials that comes into the country from overseas that we don't, that for recovery, we often miss that as well, because we don't record these that's coming in. We're getting that from imports data from the federal government, from the customs, but we don't get it from the reporting jurisdiction. So over time, we need to improve the reporting of waste facilities so that we're able to track this sort of information. But we're confident that it's gone up to 28 million tonnes for the first time. So it's going up, it's going the wrong way, the landfill. Wes asked the question, and oh my God, where do we begin with this? Are waste levies working? This suggests that there's too much going to landfill, but you might even ask, are they high enough? Is there enough coming back to industry to drive the investment? Because it's not that simple, right?
Mm. Yeah, well, look, I wouldn't like to be the judge of that. There's obviously, if you put the levy up too high, you've got a real difficult enforcement issue, and you get all sorts of weird things happening, like stuff bouncing around between jurisdictions.
Except we didn't see that in South Australia when the minister put it up $60. The question is how much is coming back to industry? You know, we just don't have sufficient coming back to co-invest, and we can't plan quickly enough. But maybe that's not today's conversation.
Yeah, whether levies work or not. Yeah, look, I'd have to say, I mean, I've always been a fan of levies, and they're a nice, easy way of doing things, but you'd have to look at this and say, well, yeah, it doesn't seem to be working in this case here.
And
What's going on?
Wes has said, and I'm not picking on you, Wes, but good on you. Happy to have the debate. Can give lots of examples where levy is not applied and good resource recovery. Arguably, that's more than levy. It's a policy setting and a mindset that we value the material that we have and we want to prolong life. Yeah. So it's got to be more than just an economic tool. In SA, how much of the RDF, the cement kiln fuel, is within the resource recovery rate? There's a question, is the RDF recovery making, I guess, artificially increasing SA's recovery rate? I don't think so.
Whoa, artificially now. So when you say artificially,
right, upping it up in a sense.
Proper recovery. Well,
it is proper recovery. It's on the hierarchy.
In the Fed system, it is energy recovery. I mean, even energy recovery from stuff in landfills is included, which is, pretty controversial, really. But on the other hand, it is counted as energy from waste, and it is energy from waste, and it seems silly if you don't attribute some material to it. Look, we're going to have these discussions more. I'm sure there's, as the incinerators start to come online, and there's a few in the pipeline there. Ideally, hopefully, it's the stuff that you can't recycle that's going to these places, and in which case, to me, it's fair enough to use it, to include it in the recovery rate. It's not disposal. The Fed system is very much not on the facility, it's on the fate. Disposal, energy recovery, recycling, fates, and energy recovery is part of it.
We're in it's in the hierarchy. So we've got, and I'm just going through this in a bit of order because it's flowed really well, guys. But so please, if we don't get to your question, we will get to it later. Why did you choose those countries, Joe? Like the comparison one, the USA made sense. So there's a couple of questions.
It's not great, but to be honest, it's the ones we could find. We scout
available
recent stuff that we can get into it and say, what is this exactly? Can we make them fit each other? And we can't always. Sorry, just Wes's question. I didn't quite answer it in terms of what proportion of the total recovery in South Australia is fuel. It's fairly small. It's fairly small, but it is in there. It is in there. We're talking there about resource co-making fuels for ad brine. Yeah, it's in there.
Jane, I'm just trying to understand. So why is the manufacture of RDF, so our resource derived fuel, and burning of this residual waste onshore classified as a secondary material outcome? I'm not, So that's because it's classified as energy recovery under the hierarchy, I'm assuming, though. Yep. All right, moving on to Suzanne. Curbside organics includes FOGO and GO, or FOGO only. Actually, yes, you did break that down. Joe, with that, those bar charts, it would be great to have total tons as well as percentage in that to sort of get a sense for just a little bit of FYI for my nerdy. Linda Norden asked, with the recovery rates, when the recovery rates are calculated, and this is predominantly organic processing, was the contamination tonnage removed from the data, or is it still included in the recovered tons? So in the MRF, you actually had the contamination level. I saw that was 14%. That is it the input, what was delivered to, say, MRF organic processing facility, that was included as the output? So was organics, you haven't got contamination rates, I think, but MRF, you did have a bin breakdown?
There's a couple of things there. First of all, MRFs are not part of this data set. So what happens? What we're counting here is stuff that goes to a recovery facility, and a MRF is a pathway on the way to a recovery facility. So that material is not included in the headline data set we're reporting. In terms of whether residuals from resource recovery facilities are included or not, so for example, I don't know, you say you get construction, well, let's say an organic waste processing facility, are we counting the inputs to the outputs? We are mostly, what we're trying to do is count inputs less residuals. But we don't have perfect data and have absolute confidence that that's what we've got. Let's say in Victoria, who is still operating a voluntary system of collecting data, they struggle to get that information, what goes out, and they're often happy with, as long as we've got a number of what goes in, that'll do. So there's likely to be small amounts of material that wasn't actually recycled or was even stockpiled on site that is included in the recovery data. We say that in the chapter, it sort of explains what we try to get. So the national standard is what goes into the facility, less residuals.
But you're not doing by facility, you're doing high level fates and flows, which answers Jane's later question where she talks about MRF residuals. So that's we can't go down to that level by facility. Yeah.
We don't collect that data at all. Well, no, we do report on it, but it's not part of the headline data set that we're describing when saying the recovery rate. MRFs are not something that's included. They're a pathway on the way to that data. So
I'm going to jump a bit further down rather than some of the detail on MRFs and stuff. And Marina asked a really good question, and I think it can go into a couple of ways. How are we accounting for disaster waste? And I think disaster waste would be a mixture of the natural disaster, but also COVID-related waste, because I know, I believe that health-related waste, clinical waste is captured differently in different jurisdictions as well. So are we able to identify those disaster waste, I guess, peaks?
We specifically ask each of the states and territories to report that, and it's quite correct that it's often outside of the levy data, and that's why we ask for it separately, because sometimes it bypasses the levy data, so it's easy to just get overlooked. But I think we've got pretty good data. I might actually say that I'd be more confident in this year's disaster waste data than previous years, and that could be another noisy thing in the data set that shows an increase. We got good data from New South Wales, from Victoria, and from Queensland, and from WA, saying quantities associated with, we're talking things like cyclones and floods and so on, where there's large quantities that bypass the levy system. But yes, it should be in the data set. Yeah, it is definitely in this year.
Do you think COVID and various lockdowns actually increased, because bear in mind this is 2021, but data did actually contribute to the increase in landfill? It's tough to say.
I don't know. What do you think? I mean, certainly it looks like there's an increase, and definitely there's a shift from CNI to MSW. You can see that in this data set, that there's a shift towards households. But in terms of the proportion, whether that explains or partly explains the small increase in the quantity of municipal waste to landfill is hard to know. I guess I couldn't really say.
I find it hard to think that it did, because like the biggest sectors that were really impacted were C&I, I guess, during that period, because we had so much closed down. C&D, we tried to open a lot. So it doesn't really make sense to me, other than potentially in some of those facilities like aged care and others that we had definitely, like in certain jurisdictions, you'd have to go by state, particularly Victoria, and look at the impact there.
Look, you might have had, I mean, it might even be, you've got all these people at home that haven't been at home for ages doing cleanups. You know, that might be part of it.
Yeah, you couldn't quite fit everything in the yellow bin, not particularly how much furniture I bought that period. All right. So why had scrap commodity prices increased significantly for nearly all waste material types in the last year? Why has green glass increased from $30 a tonne to $119 a tonne? So that was figure 18 of the report. Thanks, Jessica, for paying so much attention.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, we're the deliverers of the data. We're not necessarily always the best explainers of the data. I think there's going to be a mixed bag there. I mean, metals, scrap metals is very much related to metal prices across the world. So probably China, demand is they're very closely linked. Other materials, I don't know. Certainly, plastic polymers prices my understanding have been reasonably good across the board. Clean, single polymer streams. It was the mixed plastics that where we just had a mess. But no, I'm afraid I'm not too good at that. We'd have to have Carlo Farrell in the room. He's not here. Sorry.
Yeah, it was interesting, your plastics analysis between the mixed polymer and the single polymer. Like, I guess that mixed plastic were bales of mixed plastic that weren't being separated. We're now processing, but we're still sending offshore. Like, we've still got this massive issue with lack of market demand for recyclate in Australia. Like, we're not having a conversation that says this is secondary raw material you can use again and again, and not understanding those values as we hurtle towards 2030 and 43% reduction and 80% recovery. Cat Fry, whoever you are, I love you, and you're throwing that grenade in. So with MSW generation increasing, waste to energy surely needs to become an increasingly important part of the conversation for us all. Joe?
Well, I don't see those two things necessarily linked, but yeah. And I would hope that this municipal waste increase, that it's not a long-term trend.
Well, yes, we've got significant challenges given the products that are coming to market and the lack of home for them. So hopefully we're going to see change. What impacts on paper and cardboard exports will changing export specs have? Well, I guess the biggest issue coming at us is going to be the regulating and what those rules look like around material that goes offshore in 2025. So that one's a bit hard for you to go to. Is there a figure how many tons of soft plastics are created each year? So you could talk to Kyle's beautiful report, I guess, on that. Is that coming again soon, Joe?
Yeah, it is actually.
So the plastics report's coming soon.
Plastics report. So we don't have a huge amount of detail in this document on that.
On the soft plastics absolute generation. So Jane's asked, how does this report and data contribute to our federal government's circular economy agenda? I guess we're the engine room of the material management until we start designing differently for reuse repair. Joe, do you want to add to that?
They're definitely using this data set a lot. I mean, their targets are measured on this. So, we have a difficult relationship. We're sort of passing judgments on them while being a client of them in a sense. But they definitely use this data set in multiple ways. We got the third degree on every freaking sentence in this. You can be assured of that. So they are taking this stuff very seriously. And so it definitely is part of their agenda.
All right, we're reaching the end of time. I just want to say the plastics report is actually on the DECU website. It's been a plastic longitudinal report that's asked for. It's another one of my favourite Australian plastic plates and flows. That's right. Isabel also pointed out that RCMG AgriFutures report that was also funded is coming out in the next couple of weeks. That is a terrific piece of work as well. We're at a very fortunate stage, I think, as a sector. All this attention is paying off with some fantastic data that we can actually start building on and mounting cases if we start genuinely doing evidence-led research and not emotion. So can't wait. Joe, thank you so very, very much for doing today. It's always a pleasure.